Was this an interest you had in your youth or early adulthood, or did it come through scholastic avenues?
Yeah, it came mainly through a scholastic avenue. I was really interested in languages, and Chinese was just about as exotic as it could get. And so I decided to major in Chinese. And then once I got into the field of Chinese studies, I heard about the different practices they were doing. And I'm like, oh, I really need to learn Taiji. I mean, it sounded
Hmm.
like so fascinating. And then I also decided that Taoism was like an area that was really not understood well at all
Hmm.
and that needed a lot more study. So I um, I ended up at the University of California at Berkeley, and that's where I started both. I learned my Tai Chi form, the Long Yang form that I practice regularly and I still teach today. And I also started Daoism. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, so that's where I was Professor Edward Schaefer at Berkeley at the time. He was teaching a class in Taoism, and that was my first introduction.
Hmm. And so then you got into Tai Chi and did also Qigong or just
Well,
Tai
and
Chi?
it was I was in Berkeley in the mid 70s, and Qigong didn't really hadn't really made it out of China at that point, so it didn't quite exist yet. Chinese had it, and it was done in the parks. But it wasn't until the early 80s that Qigong actually appeared in Western countries. And that, China was pretty closed up. It was hard to get in. It was difficult to travel. And it was, tricky to find teachers. And people weren't really able to get out easily either. So it wasn't until the early 80s that Qigong teachers started to go to different countries. And then Westerners started to pick it up. And so, yes, so once Qigong came on the scene, I learned various forms and studied with various people. Yeah.
Hmm. And so what's the difference between Tai Chi and Qigong?
Well, Tai Chi started as a martial art in the 17th century. History is that the Manchus, who were a people in the northeast of China, were conquering China, and they were very good horseback riders, and they had a superior military, so they were systematically conquering the country over a period of maybe 20 years. And as they were defeating the Chinese army would disbandon. And so this one Chinese soldier who was by the name of Chen, he came from a village which is also called Chen Village, like his family village. He was demobbed and he went home, and his village, as many other villages, was subject to a lot of raids. It was the army from the conquerors, and then it was also local bandits, and then remnants of the Chinese army, and whoever could, try to get benefits from robbing these poor little villages. And so he started to train his villagers in martial arts, which he had trained in as a military person. And so, but it was totally illegal to have weapons. So before that, we've had like Shaolin, which of course is a very major center for martial arts. It was well known in the previous dynasty, and also before that, various Taoist centers had different practices of martial arts. There were monks who used some of those exercises for spiritual training, but also for endurance training. So if you want to meditate for long periods, you have to have a very strong kind of physique. And so you had martial training in those various religious centers, and also, of course, in the army and in the regular kind of society. But those were all armed. You had like, swords and staffs and sticks and chains and fans, and whatever you could lay your hands on was like, a weapon. And well, any kind of weapon bearing at the point in the 17th century was completely outlawed unless you were a member of the conquering Manchu army.
Mhm.
So this guy Chen was using his training in armed combat and developed this form of unarmed combat. and it was very efficient. And the other part was that, of course, local civilians were not supposed to be doing military training. Well, that was illegal too. So they made it look, they did it very slowly. And so they were doing it very slowly. So rather than having these chop, chop, chop movements that you would have in a military training, they would have these very slow kind of movements. So if some kind of a Manchu inspector came along, it's like, oh, what are you doing here? Well, we're doing dance. Or we're
Oh,
doing ritual, or we're doing some self-cultivation thing. So it was like a masked
yeah.
form of combat.
It's very much like
And
capoeira.
so, I'm sorry?
The capoeira, same idea.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So like suppress people who really need to learn how to defend themselves, but can't do it in the officially recognized manners. And so he ended up being very efficient, very successful, and he trained his people. And then some of his disciples went out, and other martial artists would have like competitions, and they would win these competitions. So it started to become this big movement. And in the beginning, you had to be like a member of the family or a member of the village or really adopted into this in order to be trained in this particular form. And then they ended up like a decade or two later, they started to call it Taiji because the Taiji symbol is that yin-yang interchange. So they were sort of giving it this cosmological framework, and then some books started to be written about it. And then other people from other families started to also learn the method, and especially the Young family, one of the young people, he sort of, in the beginning, he sort of snuck in there and looked through the cracks in the barn and observed, and then he became a disciple. And so you end up with different schools, the Yang school and the Chun school and the Wu school, that were then transmitted, and they developed their own, as people went along, they developed their own thing. So Taiji essentially is a martial art. It's done standing. It's very important to be centered. It's very important to have a very calm and relaxed mind so that if an attack comes from any direction, you can react to it. You want to be very open in your mind. You don't want to think about what you're going to have for dinner tomorrow or, how to approach your boyfriend or anything like this. You want to really be very open in your mind. You want to be very centered. It's all standing. And the sequences are unpredictable, which is what makes it very hard to learn. So it's like it doesn't repeat. A repetitive movement is an invitation to your opponent to hit you. Say, oh yeah, that's what's coming next, wang, so you want to be really careful with that. You want to be also centered. Your energy center is like the lower abdomen, the dantian, the elixir field, what the Japanese call the hara. You're working from there. You're very coordinated, and then you can do it very slowly with the breath, which makes it a more meditative kind of exercise. But you can also do it very fast and very efficiently, and sort of like some of the other martial arts that came out of this, such as Aikido and Karate and things. You're using your opponent's momentum to defeat them. So you're stepping out of the way. So it's very light stepping. And a lot of the action is not in the muscles. A lot of Taiji practitioners don't have those big, serious muscles that Western bodybuilders develop, but a lot of the energy is in the tendons. So there's like a lot of snapping tendon type exercises that go with the practice. So that's for Taiji. Now, Qigong is very different. It's a medical technique. It was developed in the person who sort of brought it or created this thing was a person called Liu Guizhen, and he was a communist cadre in the war against the nationalists in the 1940s. And he got very sick. He had all kinds of ulcers and various conditions that, being on an army trail, they could not treat. So they sent him home. And he was not very young. He was under 30. But he was like, his health was like really bad. And so he went home to his village, and the doctors tried different things. And then somebody suggested that he go see this Taoist who was at this nearby temple. And then this Taoist trained him in traditional, what we call Daoyin, which means Dao means to guide, and Yin means to stretch. So it's like guiding the internal energy and stretching the muscles and the joints of the body. So these traditional exercises, which involve sort of like yoga, and I do have a book on this. It's called Chinese Healing Exercises. The tradition of Daoyin came out from University Hawaii Press. That traces the history of this. So these are very ancient. We have documentation from like 200-300 BC, and then many different kinds of practices over the centuries. So those were still transmitted in the Taoist temples, and a lot of it is breathing. The exercises are repetitive. It's very different from Taiji. The mind is full of visualization. So in Taiji, your mind is open because it's a martial art. This is a healing art. So you're visualizing healing energy like from heaven or from earth or in a certain color, to go into whatever part of the body needs the healing. The movements are very gentle, very slow. They repeat. And it's done in all different positions of the body. You can do it standing, but a lot of these people who start doing this are very sick, so they can't even stand up. They sit down, they lie down. I mean, stroke victims get really much better with this practice, especially if they start doing it quickly after the stroke happens. Let's say one side of the body is paralyzed, then they can do things with their other side. And so as they're lifting, let's say their right hand, then gradually they sort of get their brain, and so the left hand starts to also move, or moving it back and forth or whatever they can do. So but the movements are repetitive. They can be done in different positions of the body. The mind intentionally sends positive healing energy into whichever area of the body needs the support. And it really works. It's a breath, gentle movement plus mental focus, visualization method, technique, and it's much simpler, much than Taiji. There are Qigong sequences. There are Qigong associated with certain animals. The 5 animals frolic is a very popular system. Goes back to about 200 AD. So at any rate, Liu Guizhen, who was very sick, ended up with this Taoist who was practicing these traditional methods, and the Taoist sort of put him also on a diet, so he wouldn't eat all this junk food, and put him on a regular schedule, so he would get up when the sun rose and go back to go to sleep when the sun sets, and sort of create like a whole energy system that would be beneficial. And it took like 2 months or something, but he ended up getting really well. And then this guy went back, he said, oh my God, this is great stuff. And my political, the leaders, the communist leaders should know about this because, it could save a lot of people. It could make people healthy. It could benefit many people. It could save tons of money in terms of, instead of using Western type medicine, you could have this kind of medicine. So he went back to his unit and he informed his superiors, commanders about this, and they looked at it and they said, yeah, it's sort of interesting, sort of cool. But we don't really like the spiritual part of it. We don't like that it's part of Taoism. We don't like that it's part of traditional cosmology. We want a whole new cosmology. And we don't really like the traditional name. We don't like this. We don't like that. And so they ended up creating a committee about it. And it took the committee 10 months to make the decision that this was something worth pursuing and to come up with the name Qigong. So the name Qigong is a modern combination that it appears coincidentally once in all of Chinese history, somewhere in the 14th century. The word Qi and Gong are connected in some texts, but that's coincidental. And they called it Qigong. I think it's breathing, Liao Fa. It's like energy work and breath control healing method. So it's actually a much longer term that they came up with. And that was in 1947. And then after that, Qigong was made available to the leaders of the Communist Party and the military at the time. And there were certain clinics north in the mountains, north and west of Beijing, where masters would be invited, and then um, modern masters, sort of more from looking at this from a biomedical perspective, would learn from Taoists who had the traditional cosmology perspective and would sort of reorganize it into something that would be appropriate for, the 20th century and the communist kind of materialistic kind of worldview. And it became within party circles in the 1950s, it became quite popular. Do you want more about the history of this, or is that enough for the moment?
Oh no, I mean, I'm very fascinated in this, especially the Daoyin, because a lot of, there's so much confusion on this point. I've studied this for many years, and I've heard thousands of different stories, it seems. And a lot of people credit India or Indian practices with the Chinese martial arts or the Chinese Qigong. But to read your book on Daoyin, is really an eye opener. And so the history is wonderful. The more you can clarify that, I think is very helpful for everybody.
Yes, well, Daoyin really is indigenous. It's Chinese, and once you get to like the 5th century, was when Buddhism really starts to play a major role in the Chinese religious scene. You also have masters come from India who have trained in some Indian practices, and you start to see some overlap and some combinations where you do get Daoyin sequences that are like called the Brahma system of, Daoyin. And you start to see integrated sequences where people move like we would do in a yoga practice today. You would start seated, and then you would get to standing, different standing postures, and you would be seated with your legs straight out, then you might be lying down, you might be lying on your side. So they're like all these sequences that come up, and they're connected to the breath. And so, but the forms are still indigenous, but then you do have some yogic Chinese, Indian kind of influence on the Chinese system. So there's a confluence definitely in the Middle Ages, but the original practices that we have documented in ancient manuscripts are definitely indigenous and are not imported from India.
And then this is this is a little different because then you have the Buddhist influence in, as we always hear, the fable of Bodhidharma and the Shaolin Temple. What can you shed some light on that for us?
Bodhidharma is a fictional character. There was some kind of a monk who came from India and who was visiting the court of Liang, the Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty at the time, and who may have also sat in a cave on Shaolin. But a lot of the stories about Bodhidharma were made up later, and there's a whole history about the Zen, the Chan school or Zen tradition within Buddhism, which was an indigenous Chinese form of Buddhist practice that aimed to go back at the original in-depth meditation discipline of the Buddha, which had been lost in China because a lot of the monasteries were sponsored by the court or by aristocratic landowners. And so the monks were given land and given servants and given food in exchange for offering prayers and services for, peace and political stability and imperial goodwill, benefits, and or the local aristocrats, may have a male heir and may be successful in his ventures, and so and praying for the ancestors of these various donors. So people weren't really meditating a whole lot. They were sort of chanting for money is the bottom line of it. And so the Chan school or Zen school started as a reaction against this. People left these monasteries, ended up in mountains, and started practicing serious meditation again. And they also did physical practices in connection with that. they also grew after a while. The groups became too big to be supported by the local villages, so they started just growing their own vegetables. So physical labor became another virtue in the Chan school. And then by the 7th century, they were big enough to be received at court. And there was a number of different branches of this kind of movement, various masters who had gone to different kinds of mountains. And they all wanted government subsidies, and they all wanted to, establish themselves as the main school and the most authentic. And so that's when this whole Bodhidharma story was developed and became part of the Chan legacy. So we really don't have Bodhidharma and Huike, and I think the third Chinese patriarch is also pretty much legendary. And then once you get to the fourth, you're looking at historical figures. And so it's a great story. I mean, this wild-looking guy who comes out of India and sort of insults the emperor, and then sits and, faces a wall to meditate for 9 years. And then this disciple who comes and who tries to, be accepted as a formal disciple, and he has to cut off his own arm. And oh my God, it's so dramatic. So.
That's hilarious. So yeah, I think that at this point, I think everybody understands that that's a myth. But certainly, when I was growing up, that was the storyline. So what kind of movements though here? So did it start out as martial arts at the Shaolin Temple? Were these people really doing Shaolin, like martial arts as we know today, or was it more Daoyin or Taiji? Not yet.
In the Shaolin Temple, I think you had both. You had a very strong. You had different levels. Like in most of these medieval monasteries, you would have a lot of different techniques and different branches and different parts to it, because even if people become monks or nuns, they're still individuals. They still have personal preferences and personal talents and abilities. And so in a temple, such a big temple compound such as Shaolin, you would have people who were like herbal masters. You would have people who would really practice a lot of meditation. You would have the people who would be chanting for the donors. You would have people who really were very philosophical, who would write commentaries on the scriptures, exegesis kind of stuff. And then you'd also, because of the same situation that the people in the Chen village were faced, you had, bandits and marauders and people who were in armies. I mean, medieval China was a very unstable kind of place. So you needed some kind of people who could defend the place if they had to. So you'd have some people who were, really vigorous physical types who ended up training in the martial arts. And so you have the Daoyin movements can be used. The earliest documentation that we have is from medical literature. Daoyin movements are for specific, like Qigong today, for specific ailments. So if you have a stiff neck, well, then you sort of bend your head forward and you lift your neck up and you sort of push your nose forward, and you have this sort of circular kind of movement with your neck. So you point your nose down and you push forward, and it's called duck in water, which is just what a duck looks, you duck puts its head down and puts its head up. And so that's what you do. And it says you do 30 times duck in water with breathing, and that will alleviate tension in your neck. So you have documentation like this. So that's where it comes from. And then you also have practices, once people are healthy, to keep strengthening them and to keep making them more fit, sort of like a fitness industry type stuff. And so they have exercises that are just the body. They have exercises with staffs and with sticks and with the little Taiji ruler and with little balls and all kinds of practices that would increase personal fitness. and then that would translate into being able to sit quietly and meditate longer because your muscles won't, cramp up if you're in pretty good shape. And it would also translate into military and martial arts type practices where they would draw on the same basic physical regimens in order to get people very fit. So
Yeah.
so you have in a in the Shaolin kind of setting, or like a medieval, like Tai, which would be one of the biggest Taoist monasteries in the early Tang Dynasty, you'd have all these different departments, people who would specialize in different areas, and they would also have groups of people who were very vigorous and good fighters who would use these Daoyin type exercises as a foundation for
Yeah.
defense.
Yeah. You, I mean, that seems like a fairly large break. Like, as far as I know, that those style practices didn't exist inside India with the Buddhists. So
Right.
that seems
That's correct.
uniquely Chinese.
Buddhist practice is not very physical. I mean,
Right.
Buddhist practice really is focused on the mind.
Right.
And so your goal is to keep your mind very stable, to keep to release, to breathe, observe your respiration, to observe your various sensations in the body, and to be sitting in a cross-legged, ideally lotus level posture for hours together to just really allow the mind to do its thing. Buddhists did not exercise in the kind of thing that the Taoists would be doing,
Hmm.
except for those Shaolin. China is different from India.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Very different. Yeah.
Yeah. I know so in Tibetan Buddhism, they have like around 11th century, these practices started to pop up, like the Salong Chulkor practices, and they're fairly physical, but they seem like more like Daoyin, or in the sense that they're energetic visualizations through the
Yes.
body with some
Yes.
movement, but it's still mostly from a sitting position.
Yes. The Tibetans have a lot more. They're like on the crossroads. The Tibetan, they received Buddhism both coming out of China and coming out of India. So both transmissions were integrated into Tibet. And so the Tibetans have a much greater respect and veneration for the body and the physical aspect of things than what you would find in traditional
Hmm.
Indian Buddhism.
Yeah, I've always had a hunch that that physicality might have been the part imported from China, not coming in
It's
from
very,
India.
it's very cold in Tibet. So I mean, you
Right.
have to take into account that, it's a
They are
lot
sort of
harder to
shaky.
sit. Like in India, where it's really warm most of the time, it's actually a nice thing to be sitting
Yeah,
quietly.
yeah,
You really don't want to move. Oh my God, it's 40 degrees or 40 Celsius, or like 100 degrees in the shade. It's like, I'm not moving. But if
uh,
you're in Tibet and it's like, around freezing, it's like, you know what? We better move, this is
yeah,
good.
yeah. Those inner
So,
heat practices, everything are
yeah,
popping up
yeah,
around the same
yeah.
time, just a way to deal with the environment.
Exactly. And then, I mean, the whole diet thing too. I mean, Indians are very vegetarian. I mean, Indian Buddhists are very strictly vegetarian. You can't even eat eggs or even honey. I mean, you just want to stay away from any animal thing. And it's like in Tibet, I mean, you eat meat. I
Yeah.
mean, and you drink the milk of the yak and all that kind of stuff. And yak fat is like a really good thing.
Mhm.
And it's partly because they just don't have the same level of agriculture and they can't produce the same amount of vegetables, but it's also cold,
Mhm.
and meat is a very warming food. So
Mhm.
you have a completely different cultural tendency that's based on simple
Yeah.
geography.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because as a Westerner, importing all these different practices and ideas from all these different cultures and geographies, figuring out what works for us in our landscape, I think is a huge part of any practice, instead of
That
just.
is absolutely correct. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
There's some very funny stories about, these people, these Western Buddhists who had their little center, and they were asked to host this major Tibetan, Rinpoche or some serious master from Tibet. And like, oh my God, we're getting a Tibetan, we're getting a holy person. Ooh. So they think up all the stuff, and they're cooking being very quiet and they're being all very reserved and they're cooking all these vegetarian foods. And he's like, so he comes, he's a very nice guy and does whatever is his thing and meets other people. And after like 3 days staying in the place, he comes out, don't you people have a decent steak around here?
So also in your book, I was intrigued because I'm a Hana somatic practitioner and Feldenkrais. So Western somatic, I have a background in this. And so in your book, you had talked about Moshe Feldenkrais and Thomas Hannah, which is even rare. Most people don't even know who Thomas Hannah is.
I love Thomas Hannah.
Oh,
He's
really?
great. Yeah, he's great. I got introduced to him, I don't know, maybe 20 some years ago. I was invited to give a lecture in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. I don't know if they still do this, but they used to have an annual in June, the so-called Zhangsan Feng Festival.
Hmm.
Zhangsan Feng being the legendary founder of Taiji. And so I gave some lectures there, and I had a shoulder issue at the time. And one of the people there, John Lupus, I don't know if you know him, he's in Massachusetts. So he was a practitioner of somatics, and so he gave me a treatment, and then he gave me a bunch of the old tapes of Thomas Hannah, and we've become very serious Hannah followers. And I have a whole battery of his tapes. I just love it. I mean, he's so funny and he's so
Yeah.
relaxing, and just listening to these tapes. You lift your arm. No, George, turn to the right, George. He's so funny. But yeah, and so somatics and Feldenkrais and also the Alexander technique, which I also love very much, are all methods where you're using the body in a very integrated way, and you're very aware of, as you're contracting one side of the body, you're expanding the other, and you're like working with the dynamic very yin yang sort of dynamic interchange of the musculature of the body, and you're doing things in a very gentle way that yet have a very profound effect. And so in a lot of ways, I like the approach, and I find a lot of resonance in the tradition, in the Daoyin tradition.
Wonderful. So yeah, so did I. I had a martial artist on here not too long ago, Tim Cartmel. He's a translator, and he spent like 11 years in China studying the different martial arts. And he got home and he said one of his teachers turned him on to Alexander, and he's like, as soon as I saw him, I was like, well, this guy studied Tai Chi. Alexander. He's like, it was just almost identical.
Yes.
I thought the same thing. I studied Tai Chi, and then I came to Alexander technique, and I was like, this seems like Tai Chi to me.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful stuff. I mean, all of them are very, very good. And I've done a number of courses in Alexander, and I've had some treatments and classes in Feldenkrais, and we spent, like I said, a number of years really getting serious about somatics. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like with these traditions, this mind-body connection that you're working with the consciousness, this idea of first-person experience or embodiment. You don't find that in a lot of Western disciplines. Even a lot of Western martial artists seem to have eliminated that aspect of it.
Yes, I agree. A lot of Western people are just not aware of energy, and they're not aware of the whole body-mind connection, and so it's but you're multiplying, you're enhancing any kind of practice you do by having the right kind of mental attitude, and even these little visualizations that come in, and you're supporting the body by the way you think, and it's just so important. And the thing is, I mean, what from the Daoyin perspective, or also the traditional sort of Alexander and Thomas Hannah perspective, what a lot of people do in the West, like they go to the gym and there's this music blasting, and it's like, and then they're watching TV, usually news, which are usually bad, and then they think they're doing something, and they're exerting themselves, and they think they're doing something good for their bodies, and it's like, where did that come from? I mean, how did they get this idea? It seems totally absurd from a traditional Chinese perspective, where you really You want to be very calm. You want to be very quiet. You want to send positive energy into the body. You want to move your body in a way that's natural, that is not pushing it. And you're strengthening it just by just gently you keep doing stuff, but it's like, so.
Yeah. And so there's a, in my opinion, I think my experience so far. So I've studied Alexander as well, and Alexander has this idea of the means whereby these how do I accomplish these movements internally, and then you got like directing, inhibiting the habits, all this. And I feel like also the Chinese practitioners had these similar things, like they had these internal places to place the mind, like whether it's the Ding and Rise Up, or the Daoyin, or the Dantian, or the Bubbling Well. Like they had these internal landmarks, then you would dynamically work systematically through these, um,
Correct.
which is incredibly sophisticated. And I don't even think our Western somatics, especially Feldenkrais and Hanna, doesn't have that. I think Alexander has it a bit, and he was trying to work it out, but it seems like it has been worked out, at least in the Chinese practices.
Yes, like this ancient saying that the Chinese have is like where the mind or the intention goes, the chi will follow.
Yeah.
So you really need to put your mind into a certain place, and a lot of times they encourage you to use the dantian, the lower field, like your center of gravity, and to the center of your mind there, and then let everything come from there. But they also they put the mind into the palms, or into the feet, or into some of the shoulders, or in certain places where you really are using your mind and guiding your chi, and then your body follows. So it's like
Yeah.
a third step after mind and chi and body. That the you don't have, that's true. Even Thomas Hanna has his exercises are very lovely, and your mind is very calm, which is good. And it's all very gentle and very balanced. See, I like that, you're doing one thing and you're getting into some other part of the body. That's another thing Westerners don't tend to see often, is that whole diagonal structure. A lot of
Mm.
Thomas Hanna, when you're stretching, when you like doing back bends, you're turning your head to one side and put that head, the cheek on the elbow, and then you're lifting the opposite arm. So a lot of it is diagonal, which is the
Hmm.
way the body really works.
Yeah.
And it's much more powerful than doing things one-sided and doing, 50 repetitions of something on one side. So
Yeah. And this idea too in China, and I think there's been, I know there has been some modern research into like acupuncture and the meridians and the fascia lines, because fascia is the spiraling kind of idea too. And it seems like you got Yi and Jing, like their work, the different silk reeling practices, like you said earlier, they were working with fascia and the springy energy. Could you talk a little bit
yes,
more about
tendons
that?
and fascia.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's a very powerful way. That's it's one of the other things, is that the Westerners tend to focus on more on the muscle building and the aerobic part of it. Keep the heart rate up and the oxygen level high and things like this. They don't really. I mean, there are no real focused tendon exercises that
Hmm.
I'm aware of in gyms.
Yeah.
Whereas on the qigong front, there's a qigong form that I personally like very much. It's called what's it called? Tendon stretching exercises, and it comes. It's actually a Taoist exercise and there's documentation on it from a Taoist who performs them. La la jin, da jin jing, da jin jing. Yeah, extending, stretching. La means stretch, and jin is the tendons. La jin gong. Yeah, and it's so there's I can send you the link to these there on YouTube. There's a video, or not YouTube, but some other Chinese video where the Taoist is doing it, and then there's a Chinese group in Taiwan that's performing these, and I was introduced to them through a friend down in Atlanta,
Hmm.
and she went to this qigong practice on a regular basis, and we were visiting. It's like, oh, we're coming along. And so
Hmm.
it's this group of like maybe 30 Chinese people, and they were meeting in a Korean store that was selling kitchens. And so here we are surrounded by kitchens, trying to do Chinese exercises. He didn't speak much English, so it's all in Chinese. It was very enjoyable, but I loved it. And then I found out how to find it on YouTube, and we practiced it for a few years. It's really good stuff. And a lot of them are like based on the Baduan Jin, the 8 brocades.
Yeah.
So they're like the Shaolin, which goes back to some of the Shaolin exercises. But then they're really focusing on that, pushing out and snapping and getting
Yeah.
those tendons to work. So it's not hardcore muscle stuff. It's more tendon oriented, and tendons are sort of ignored in the Western. I mean, unless you pull one, they ignore
Yeah.
them in the West.
Yeah. Well, I thought Thomas Han is, he says I don't stretch, I do pandiculate. He pandiculates. So it's like a
Yes,
co-contraction and a pushing out, and you can a lot of like the Tai Chi or Shaolin practices I had been introduced to had that similar effect.
exactly, and that
Mhm.
works into the tendons. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you look at the fascia lines and like they are springy and this elastic recoil. I look a lot at like the parkour people running and bouncing and rolling. I'm like, okay, it's like Feldenkrais sped up. So
Yes.
we can
Yeah.
take this into more where again though the Chinese seem like they had all of this. Like you had the slow, you had the but then you also had the powerful. Like they had it all. Where I still feel like our Western somatics are like in slow motion and they don't go into
That's true. A lot of it is very slow in the West. Yeah. Well, the other part that goes into the Chinese, and there's a friend of mine who's worked on this quite a bit, is the whole theater dimension of.
yeah.
There's the acrobatics and the theater and the performance arts, which are also part of that same cultural string. There's the martial arts, the Daoyin exercises, which are medical, and then they're health enhancing, and then they can be, very vigorous health enhancing, then they can be martial, and they can be military, but they can also be into the acrobatic lines and into the whole theater culture. And it's
Mhm.
Scott Phillips is his name,
Oh,
and
cool.
he's written a very interesting book, actually, maybe even two by now, but a very interesting book on the connection between Taiji and theater.
Okay.
That's his big thing. He says that like before the division between martial arts, health, and sort of self-cultivation and theater is a 20th century Western induced kind of thinking division that was not present until the late 19th century.
Yeah.
And so these guys were all like part of that same cultural sort of mishmash. And it wasn't until later, under Western impact, that those categories they weren't even thought of as being different.
Yeah.
It was the same thing. It just, you got hired by a theater troupe, or you got hired to be a bodyguard, or you ended up in a monastery, but we're still doing the same kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's very Western, right? Break everything.
Yes, it's a very West. I mean, a lot of the Chinese, they tended to adopt a lot of Western kind of thinking, and so that was one of the things that they did. And there was political benefits to once you define yourself as a certain kind of entity, then you can get
Yeah.
subsidies, or you can get support, or you can get recognition, or you can get be organizational.
Yep.
If you're like this vague entity that, well, what are you, theater or
Yeah.
martial or what, then you sort of fall into the cracks. So the once the state started to reorganize along Western lines, then these kinds of organizations needed to figure out where they wanted to fit into.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about so things like the Dantian and things like this? Can we talk about these places in the body to put the mind, like why you would want to do that? Like how do you do it? What's the benefit of it?
The Taoist system, which, let's put it this way, the Chinese body has a vertical and a horizontal structure.
Hmm.
And the vertical structure matches the universe, heaven, earth, and humanity, And it's actually heaven at the top and humanity in the middle and earth at the bottom. And the human body matches those three cosmic dimensions in that the heavenly part is the head, the human part is the chest, and the earth part is the abdomen. And in each of these parts, in the center of the head, the center of the chest, and the center of the lower abdomen, they have like what you would call a vortex, like an energy power center, which you can envision as like a spiraling power vortex, which they call dantian, which literally means elixir field or cinnabar field. Cinnabar is a mineral that was used to concoct alchemical elixirs in ancient China.
This is like
And
mercury, like the
yes,
alchemical
it's
stuff coming
mercury
from.
sulfide. It's a mineral that's found naturally on the banks of certain rivers. It's got a
Yeah.
dark red coloring, and if you heat it up, then it divides chemically into its two parts, which are mercury and sulfide and sulfur. And and then there's oxygen goes into it, and then if you keep heating it and put more oxygen, it reconstitutes itself as cinnabar.
So
And so they thought this was fabulous, and it was very interesting that you had this mineral that would divide into these different parts and would turn to mercury, and then you kept heating it and it would go back into being cinnabar. So it's like this renewal and rebirth and reconstitution and resurrection kind of mythology that was associated with it, which made cinnabar like the key factor in alchemical practice. And so the cinnabar field is like a place where you concoct this elixir. You create like the reverted cinnabar, which is more purified and which has more potency and gradually becomes more and more spiritual. And then they not only did this, I mean, alchemy in all cultures is both a physical operative technology, chemical kind of technique, plus a spiritual transformation. So the
yeah, right,
alchemist undergoes spiritual self-transformation as they're doing their concoctions.
mm-hmm.
So the cinnabar field was also located in the body. And then they decided that there were three of them. And so you have one in the head, in the middle of the head, one in the chest, and one in the abdomen. And so that's the vertical structure of humanity, of the human body that matches heaven, humanity, and earth. And those are energy centers that you want to activate. So as you're doing Qigong, you're lifting your arms up, you place your palms above your head, you visualize the energy of heaven flowing into your head through the top of the head, which is an energy point known as the 100 meeting point in acupuncture and known as the heavenly gate in Daoism. And then it reaches your upper elixir or cinnabar field in the center of the head. And then you push it further down and reaches the center of your chest, activates your elixir field there, and then it goes to your dantian in the lower abdomen, which is about a couple of finger widths, like 2-3 inches below the navel in the middle of the abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want those activated, and you want those vortexes spinning, and you want there's deities that reside in them. You want the deities to be active. And you want the energy to keep flowing from one to the other so that they connect to heaven above and to earth below. And so they're really vitalized in your practice. And so your mind focuses on those fields. And again, you know, a lot of it in Taiji, a lot of it, you center it in the lower abdomen. But once you have it in the lower abdomen, then the other two, the middle and the upper elixir field, are also active because it's on the same central axis.
Yeah.
And being central and being vertical is key in the Taiji practice. Now, the horizontal structure of the human body is known as the 5 inner organs, and it matches the 5 directions of Chinese cosmology. So it's north and east and south and west and the center. And you have 5 organs that are residing in the torso, in the abdomen, that are, you know, the lungs and the heart and the kidneys and the spleen and the liver. So you want to have the qi flow through these organs in a harmonious, steady kind of way. And in many ways, health in the Chinese traditional system is defined as having a goodly, healthy amount of qi in each of the organs, and have that qi continue to flow in a productive and positive way from one organ to the next.
Yeah.
So a lot of Qigong practices are for those organs. So like
Yeah.
when we talk about the five animals frolic, each animal is associated with a different organ. And so
Hmm.
certain animals, support the lungs. And like, as far as I know, there are many different versions of this five animals thing, and there are also different sets of correspondences. So historically, you have the kidneys, for example, being associated with the bear,
Yeah.
which is a posture where you're sort of sinking down, you're almost in a squat, and then you're sort of moving back and forth to the right and left. And it's like the pivot is in your lower back, which is the kidney area.
Hmm.
And then you're stretching your one arm up and one arm down. And then there's a bear ramble, which is a very old form, which is mentioned in Zhuangzi already, like 300 BC, and shows up in the Daoyin too, the exercise chart in 168 BC, and then shows up again in the Five Animals Frolic. So bear imitations are very ancient. And it's associated with, the kidneys being one of the most powerful energy centers in the body. So those are also energy centers, but the three vertical centers are slightly more primordial. So in terms of the gestation or the development of the human body, the vertical line starts first, and then the organs develop around
Yeah.
it. And you want all of those activated and harmonious. And you can, depending on your personal situation, also depending on the season. Like,
Yeah.
this is the season of spring. This is when the liver needs more support. The liver is the most active, and so you want to do qigong that relates to the liver. Once another few weeks down the road, we start getting into summer, you want to focus more on the heart. So there's seasonal practices that come into it.
Yeah. I mean, this in one way I feel like it's esoteric, but in another way it seems very practical. It's like
Yes.
you're embodied, and then you keep your mind and things moving gently in the body, and you stay present in the body instead of, outside of your head and anxiety and worrying and thinking. There's a kind of dynamic mental movement again, which Western somatics, they have this like bring the mind here, kind of think this, but it's vague, where it seems like the Chinese have really mapped it out and been real precise.
Yes, that's very true. And also, it's not just you and your mind, it's also the nature around you. So
Yeah.
so we acknowledge the fact that, your body needs different things and has different preferences and has different
Hmm.
kinds of energies as the days are longer. I mean,
Yeah.
if you have, a 14-hour day, and you have, lots of sunshine, and lots of, the trees are blooming, and so, oh my God, you feel very enthusiastic and you have lots of energy. Whereas, if you only have like 10-hour days, and it gets barely daylight by 8, and by 5 in the afternoon it's dark again, it's like, oh my God, and it's cold the whole time, and you have to keep
Yeah.
making fires and wearing multiple layers of clothes. I mean, you don't really feel like doing too much. And
Yeah.
and so you're adjusting to what the seasonal changes bring, especially, China being in the northern hemisphere, and a lot of these practices coming from central and north China. You take into account the kinds of seasonal changes that are happening.
Yeah. There's a nice interconnected uh, philosophy there. Understanding I'm part of the environment. The environments affect this nice back and forth and balanced harmony between self and other, which I feel like we become a little disconnected here in the West. That's not really, we just
Yeah, and I mean, if you're
turn the
living in
air
a
on.
city, I mean, it's easier to be disconnected. I mean, you've
Yeah.
got all these electric lights. I mean, the city never sleeps. There are always bright lights everywhere, You know, you can go 24-hour diners and stuff. So, which is, I mean, Taoists, of course, like being in nature. You know, they
Yeah.
withdraw into the mountains. They live on their landed estates, and
Hmm.
so awareness of nature and natural seasonal change is an important factor in the Taoist tradition, and also in connection to Qigong. And you're adjusting your diet too. I mean, you want as much as possible having organic foods and vegetables and have things that are in season. So you eat certain
Yeah.
kinds of fruit more when they are in active season than when they're much harder to get. So.
Yeah. And so to go back to something piqued my interest when you were talking about the way that Tai Chi was developed, um, and these slow motion movements. So there's nothing inherently uh, good for the person or individual. It was just to be incognito. And then the benefits of moving slow came later. Like, oh, I think it's a very good idea to move slow. But at first, this wasn't the purpose. It wasn't a health consideration.
No, the original purpose of the Taiji practice was self-defense and was to allow people with their bare hands to, and that's where you want really good tendons, you know, because it's like that sort of karate chop type thing, you know, you're
Yeah.
chopping, you know, very sharp, and you need muscles, but you really need your tendons to be sharp and your mind to be very laid back and very alert and very keen. Um, and so the movements you would, as with all movements, doesn't matter, even dance or whatever, you start slow, and then
Yeah.
you once your body starts to learn how to do them, then you speed them up. But the idea being a self-defense kind of practice was really not to be slow and meditative. The whole meditative and yes, I mean the moment you move, you get healthier. I mean
Yeah.
it's very hard to avoid health benefits doing that. But the whole meditative dimension of it is much later.
Yeah.
It's the whole original. It's really a defense. And then people had, like I said, these competitions where sort of martial type masters. Um, Other people who were doing unarmed combat were like, okay, you know, let's have like, you know, let's have some sparring, let's have some competition here, and then a little um, prizes to be won, and oh, so and so is the grand master, and you get the high title of things. So you would get into that, but you wouldn't be slow on that. I mean,
No,
if
no,
you're
no.
slow, you know, you're yeah, you're history. You're history.
Yeah.
You need
Yeah.
to move. Which is why Tai Chi, even today, you have the push hands, you know, and some of those are very fast.
Yeah.
They're really moving very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you see, so in the West, do you see people practicing doing these things like they just completely to miss the point, or it's an incomplete system, or do you think they got it, or this is going to keep evolving? Like, how do you sort of see the West digesting these practices?
And it's a very individual thing. I mean, you have people in the West who are very attuned and who are very good and who are very, you know, subtle in their understanding and who've had great masters and are very, very good about it. And you may have some people who are just going through the motions and they're just what, you know, they don't really get the spirit behind it, so it's
Hmm.
not predictable. And
Yeah.
it's the usual, you know, you can offer the water but you can't make the horse drink. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I found that the approaching these things from a Western somatic point of view and kind of then introducing this technique to some of these practices, they seem to kind of get it like, oh, okay, this is and we're trying to do this with these things. We're not just waving our arms in the around here.
Yes, yes, it's very important to teach Tai Chi with the understanding that you're not just waving your arms, that you're
Mhm.
really doing something a lot more sophisticated than that, and that the arm movement is entirely secondary, if not tertiary. I mean, it's like a third level. You know, the body is like the extraneous part. It's your mind and your chi that's really doing the work. Um, and like some people find it harder to work with that. It's definitely, I mean, a lot of people are asking me, why is it that yoga is so popular and Qigong is not? And that's one of the reasons, is
Yeah,
that when in Qigong it's much more subtle than that, and
yeah,
you're not so much interested in having these, making yourself into a pretzel of some sort, or standing on your head, or doing whatever fancy yoga thing that is, it's very theatrical and you can really exhibit. A lot of the stuff that you do in Taiji and Qigong is internal, and so
yeah.
you look just the same and you're just standing there, and it's like, well, what the heck is that doing, but
Doesn't
it's
make a good magazine cover.
all right. It's just not sexy,
Hmm.
you know. And the work is really more on the inside, and it shifts your perspective into a more energy centered kind of universe, and then you start to see your life in terms of the ups and downs of energy. You see how you're relating to nature, you're relating to the society, you're relating to like the way people think. I mean, you're catching all these ideas that they're throwing around. You're subject to certain kinds of energies in your house, and with the feng shui. I mean, it goes on and on and on from there. And but you're starting to see the world in different dimensions, and which is another reason why qigong is not as popular, is very threatening,
Hmm.
because it's like, oh, my traditional world, it's all these solid building blocks, and
Yeah.
here's me, that's a very solid thing, and here's my
Mhm.
house, a very solid thing, and all of a sudden it's all fluid, and it's like energy, and it's moving back and forth, and oops, who the heck am I, and so there's a certain, yoga doesn't have that. You can retain whatever identity you have and do your yoga posture.
Mhm.
You do enough qigong, and your energy and your whole identity starts to shift, and you're
Yeah,
like, oops, no, I'm
yeah,
not doing that.
yeah. I like that. I think before the '60s, yoga was seen as meditative. The Beatles went to Rishikesh and meditated, and then somewhere in the
Right.
'80s, with the fitness movement, you had these certain Eastern gurus come in from India, Iyengar and Patabi Joyce and these people, and it became fitness.
That's right.
And now yoga. I don't. So in your generation, you probably saw it change from meditation to fitness. And
Yes.
now
Yes.
it's fitness class. It's like aerobics.
Most of it is. I mean,
Most of
there's
it is.
still yoga centers that have the spiritual aspect to it, and certain teachers that teach it in a spiritual way. But yeah, the majority is, and it's in a gym, and it's like, your goal is to be able to do certain postures, and a lot of it is very, the movements tend to be very angular, and they're often very rigid, and it's like it's always quite a mystery to me how people still get, but they obviously get benefits from it, otherwise they wouldn't go back to it. So
Yeah,
but it could be so
little
much
help.
more powerful if it had that energy component.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they so in Daoyin I think you had those aspects, but then it changed with the alchemy, and I guess in the same was being mirrored in India at the time with Tantra, because they also have they're talking cinnabar and they're talking alchemy, and
That's right. Yeah.
then you get the
There's the
Hati.
tantric Buddhism, integrates a lot of the very similar kinds of practices. Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you see that taking place? Was each of these things happening in their own countries, and or there was this inter dialogue, and these things were happening synergetically, or
Well, you had it's both. You have certain developments that, if more people start practicing these kinds of things, then they bring different aspects and different perceptions and different dimensions to them, and so the tradition opens up, and you start getting different parts to it. And then, of course, I mean, yes, and once you get to the Tang Dynasty, there's a lot of Tibetans who showed up in China, and
yeah,
Tantric Buddhism was one of the top schools in Buddhism in China. And so if these, and then the Song Dynasty too, you got a lot of tantric deities and tantric kind of practices that were adopted into Taoism. And so you have a lot of interchange going back and forth. And then the Tibetans adopted more of the Chinese stuff. And so you do have both developments. There's indigenous tendencies to become more subtle and more sophisticated and develop new forms as more people get into this stuff. But you also have the international exchange between cultures. It's all of the above.
That's fascinating. Is there anything you would like to add on, thing that we didn't get to cover?
No, I'd like to add, there's a couple of books in relation to this. There's a very good book by a German physicist called the Quantum, what is it called? Qigong and Quantum Physics. And it's a very good book. And it's sort of, she was trained in physics in Germany and went to China as a postdoc, was supposed to work in a lab there. And then, Beijing being Beijing, she got sick very quickly with major colds. And then she's like, okay, I need to get better. And she got to this hospital, traditional Chinese type hospital, and they hooked her up with this Qigong person. And the person would just wave their arms about and make her do a few movements, and whang, the cold was gone. And it's like, wait a second, what just happened here? And that just set her out in this whole different, it turned out that the physics lab that she was supposed to work at didn't really need her. So she ended up really studying Qigong. And she wrote this book, Qigong Meets Quantum Physics is the title.
Okay.
And we published it. I run a publishing company called 3 Pines Press. And then I wrote a book called Science and the Tao, which came out in 2016. That's also has a lot of information on different aspects of science in relation to Taoist cultivation. So those are resources people might want to look at. They can go to the website 3pinespress.com and look at the different works. All the books are available either as a paperback print or in a PDF form, so it's easy to get. So that's one thing I'd like people to be aware of. There's also, we've published a number of books on Qigong by Dr. Wu, Dr. Baolin Wu, who is a Chinese medical physician now practicing in Santa Monica, but who was trained in various Taoist techniques at the White Cloud Monastery in Beijing. And we just published a 4th book by him. So there's some very interesting forms of Qigong that are not well known otherwise, and that he developed and that he learned from the Taoists and then practices and teaches in Los Angeles. And then on a completely separate note, I run a Zoom lecture series, and you can also find information on that on the same website, 3pinespress.com. The lecture series is called Tao Explore, and it's every second week on a Thursday at 11 in the morning on Eastern time. But it's about a 40-50-minute lecture and then some questions. But I do record the lecture, and then the lecture gets sent out to the participants, and you can subscribe to the series, and it's very cheap. And we do all kinds of different topics. I saw we're doing a talk on visualization. What different kinds of Taoist practice involve visualization, and why does it work? What's the science behind it? So I tend to connect, like you do, the somatics and the Daoyin. So I tend to connect different aspects of science. With Taoist practices and theories. And so some talks, it's very erratic. There was a talk on Daoism and Chan that came out a while ago, and then some are more on practices, some are very philosophical. We were discussing Taoist ethics. So it's an exploration. It's
Yeah.
not like an organized class. So and I usually don't know until the beginning of the month what I'm going to talk about next month. So
Yeah.
it's uh, it's quite nice. So that might be something people might want to look at.
Yeah. Okay. I'll share that and I'll put it in the show notes as well. And
Good. Thank you.
well, it was lovely meeting you. Thanks for sharing with
Yes,
us.
it was wonderful. Thank you so much. That was excellent.
Bye, Dr. Cohn. Thank you.
Yeah. Goodbye.